welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here, Clark.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hallerman.
Oh, please. We've known each other far too long for that.
Okay,
Um,
you got to respect the title.
I appreciate that though. I appreciate that. Although it
You put
sounds
in
weird.
work. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I did. I did. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Hallerman, it is. So those of you that don't know this very familiar face, maybe I should put my glasses on. Okay, Clark Gregg is an actor and a filmmaker. He is best known for playing Agent Paul Coulson in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He has appeared in nearly 100 films and series. He wrote the movie What Lies Beneath. I love that movie. Wrote and directed the films Choke and Trust Me. Clark is an advocate for affordable mental health care and has worked with groups such as NAMI, Operation Mend, and recently received the Champions of Mental Health Award from Pacific Clinics. What is the Champions of Mental Health Award?
I had the same question. Um, I have friends there, and they actually really focus on providing mental health treatment throughout a lot of parts of California to
Mhm.
people who can't afford it.
Oh, I love
And
that.
uh, done some work with them, and sometimes they want to do a banquet. And
Yes,
I was like, "Am I a champion of mental health? Am I a champion of mental illness?" You could depends who you talk to. Um,
right, right.
yeah, but anyway, spreading the word.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you've been talking more about mental health and about your own struggle with anxiety and what that's looked like for you, especially later in life. I think that's so important. And, one thing that I think is so important is the idea of teaching through storytelling and letting people really understand when they can see themselves in someone else's story and go, hey, I'm not alone. Or, oh, I didn't know there was anybody else that felt the same way that I did. And maybe in seeing them, there's hope for me that I can do something too, or I can start to heal as well. And that was really the precipice for me in writing the book that I wrote last year was so important. And I got back so much good information about the idea of telling my story that I really wanted to start to interview some of my friends that also live in this very creative world, but at the same time, through their storytelling in that way and through their storytelling of their personal journeys, we can really start to break some stigma and get rid of some shame and start the healing process. So, does that resonate with you? And why is that so important to you now?
It does. You and I met years ago when we were both working in areas of film and television, and it's a term that's beaten to death. But that's about people who are storytellers, people who are trying to make sense of the world through stories. And I mean, I can get super pretentious about it very fast because I do think it's what we've been doing since the beginning of time. It's the way my
Mhm.
mind works in understanding my life. Now, more and more people are talking about what their narrative is.
Mhm.
And I think it's a way of understanding ourselves. And also, I've certainly gotten to a place where sometimes I go, wait, I've adopted this as my narrative, but I think I need to question some things, or I need to get those close to me to help me figure out, because I think I'm leaning into things that may have shifted or may not have been true to begin with. So uh, some of our discussions in the past have been about the ways where I, um, I moved to New York at 19 and went to a lot of really fun punk clubs and lived in a very druggy, wild environment. Um, and certainly came out of that and out of my kind of high school experience in a college town where we were going to fraternity parties way too young and drinking way too much. I came out of that, and it took me a minute, but I became sober 20 years ago, and one of the things that I found beautiful about recovery is people share their story, their experience, strength, and hope. And that's a bunch of other people listen to it, and they find themselves less alone, less lonely with, I don't know, it's so often you're in a meeting or something like that, and you find yourself connecting to someone else's story in a way that helps you.
Mhm.
And it's why a big part of that having recovery comes from being of service to other people.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, I guess I should do that at some point. And then you start to do it a little bit, whether it's in your share, whether it's in sponsoring somebody, or just your friends trying to help them when they start to go, maybe this isn't serving me anymore.
Mhm.
And you start to realize, oh no, this thing just doing that got me so much more recovery. Or in the case of, mental health stuff, it helped me. And uh, where I see those things coming together is I really, I really, so, 41 and 42, in my early 40s was when I finally really, um, quit drinking and drugging at all. It had been very minor up to that point. And once I did, you go through a second level of the process, which is, oh, I don't think I realized. The same thing happened when I quit smoking many years ago, which was I felt terrible.
Mm.
I felt really messed up, really emotional, really moody, really crabby. And it wasn't just coming off the drug of nicotine. There was a way where I had been medicating feelings
Mhm.
that way. And the same thing was very much true of the other things. I realized when I first really didn't use those crutches to lean on, that, boy, when things are really good or really bad, I really noticed that I don't have any way to kind of blunt that or deal with it. And I started to remember so many highs and lows where I had leaned on those things. And when they're gone, other stuff has to take, you have to find other tools. And
Mhm.
ideally, and I was very aware, even when I was still using, I was like, well, I really want to find a way to get to this place that I feel in a good, briefly, organically. And what I found is that, a married father of a young kid doing a lot of work under some pressure, was that a lot of feelings came up that were new. They felt new. I hadn't really dealt with them before. And as you and I discussed, and I've spoken about it now, but it took me a while. I had this very, very strange thing. I'd always considered myself a little bit of a thrill seeker. We used to go do theater in Vermont. I would dive off the cliff at the quarry. I loved it. I was scared, but I liked working through that. I've done
Mhm.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu for years. I picked up surfing 6 years ago. I like the kind of thrill nature of that.
Mhm.
Yet I was doing a lead on a network television show, 22 episodes a year, and I was handling that really stressful 9 months. Fine. And then it was over, and we would go on vacations, and I would go into a very bad place physically. My body felt like I was in a plane that was crashing,
Mm.
essentially, and I couldn't get out of it. And the more it went on, I don't know enough about the chemicals to know, the darker it got. And I was trying to figure out what it was. Why am I do vacations make me insane? This is
Mm.
weird. It's when I need to recharge. And I'd go back to work and it would go away. And I tried everything. I tried some forms of medication. I tried meditation. I tried In LA, you can find a lot of stuff to try.
Exactly.
I tried some acupuncture in my ears, acupuncture everywhere else, EMDR. I thought maybe I had some old trauma. I probably do. And I mean, you name it. I tried it, and every year vacation would come around, and I was like, oh no, we're going to go somewhere beautiful, and I'm going to be losing my mind.
Mm.
And I never really thought of anxiety because I got nervous,
Mhm.
but I didn't feel anxious. I'm like, let's
Right.
go, let's do it. I'm going. But my body had very different stuff going on. And finally, in desperation, I found a book on Amazon called Dare. And it was kind of almost like a self-help version of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy,
Mhm.
where you not what you resist persists. Very common. It's funny. This is
Mhm.
a lot of addiction stuff. You go, okay, you got to get to a place where you go, I'm accepting this. I feel terrible right now. Everything in my there's somebody inside me who thinks we're dying. I'm looking around, it doesn't quite seem that way. And you do these exercises where you say, bring it on, and where you watch yourself tolerating this. And whatever that frightened creature is inside of you starts to get the message, and
Mhm.
it passed.
Yeah.
And
That's
like 3 days later, I took my daughter on vacation in Long Island, and we visited my wife who was working back there. And I was like, oh my God, I'm better. That's incredible. But it had been a really rough couple of years
yeah. Yeah.
going through that, and I was exhausted from it. I thought I never, and I was, like I said, I was late 40s or something, and I never really thought of myself as someone with anxiety. I felt very ashamed that this had happened. It was really brutal trying to explain it to my wife.
What, you were ashamed that you had anxiety?
Yes, I think it was
Yeah.
old programming. It felt,
Yeah,
you
of
say
course.
anxiety, I think of Woody Allen.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm so anxious. I'm so nervous. I was like, no, I'm
Yeah.
not. So I had
Yeah.
some machismo bullshit, but also,
Right.
you can't explain it to your partner. You look fine. So, we were in the south of France, and I'm losing my mind in the
Right.
most beautiful backyard on the planet. And you can't explain it to yourself, and you can't get
Right.
out of it.
Right.
And for me, there was just, I left home very early. And there was a thing where when I was alone dealing with it and I couldn't explain it to anybody, where it just ramped up the terror. And they talk about it being afraid of the fear. Oh
Yep.
no, here it comes. And I start to think that this can almost attach itself to anything. If you have one of these when you're playing volleyball, every time you get near a volleyball net, it just goes, maybe this is going to happen. And pretty soon you're in.
Exactly.
So I thought it was interesting that this came up after I got sober. That maybe I had been managing some version of this for many years in different ways. And now I
Mhm.
had nowhere to go, and now it was coming up. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but I felt maybe there's something positive here. And I had begun to do some work with the National Alliance for Mental Illness just because I thought, I'm, never going to tell anybody that I have anything to do with this, but I'm going to help them raise money. I'm going to show up and do some stuff.
Right.
And then I
Right.
was sitting on a panel with them 7 or 8 years ago, talking about it. I was like, I just feel like I need to say something out loud here, which is, I wasn't sure why I was so driven to work with these people. And then I realized, oh, because I have this. And I said,
Hmm.
I have anxiety. And I felt like it was wimpy. I felt it was weird to say.
Hmm.
I felt like it was too revealing. Like so much, if you work in the semi-public sphere, people feel entitled to a lot of your private life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to a certain extent, maybe that's part of the thing, but this felt really scary to talk about.
Yes.
Also knew at the time, this is going to help me. This is going to help me because a lot of the thing that the program that NAMI was working on then, I think they still are, was anti-stigma.
Yes.
And I
Exactly.
was like, okay, yeah, stigma sucks. That's true. Well, shouldn't we be talking about how everyone should have access to a therapist and blah, blah, blah. And those things are also true. But the stigma around mental health issues, mental health treatment was so prevalent. I certainly have found that it was very prevalent, and it was something that was very tough for men of a certain age. I do think the younger males are in a little bit better shape with this.
Mhm.
Really felt like it was not something they were comfortable. More and more performer friends of mine have kind of come out to each other as, sometimes I get like panic attacks.
Right.
Come on when I'm about to go on stage, and I'm completely terrified and
Yep.
I don't know what to do. And it's still, and so that that has been a really tricky thing for me. But I also felt the minute I started to get public about it, as much as I felt embarrassed, I had people reaching out to me immediately. As
Yes.
you said, I had people reaching out to me saying from all around the world because of instant,
Yes. Yep.
I'm on the edge. I don't think I can make it another week. I'm going through this. What do I do? And that becomes a great privilege,
Yeah. Exactly.
because you can kind of go, hey, I hear you. I've been there. Maybe not exactly where you are. Here are some resources. Can I put you in touch with this person? And also, just more importantly, you're not alone. And a lot of people, certainly some men, reached out. What's that book?
Yep,
What's CT? How can I get some help with this, you know?
exactly. I
And
love it.
I found in the same way that telling your story and being of service helps you stay in recovery, I really feel like being public about this, as much as I find it difficult sometimes, is a privilege. It helps me. It feels less lethal. It felt
Mm,
it felt dangerous.
mm,
I've had these things come out of nowhere 3 or 4 times in my life, and it felt so overwhelming. I didn't quite know how to cope,
hmm.
and felt like I don't know what's going on. I'm terrified. I have good doctors, and I still can't figure this out.
Right.
I'm very wary about medication,
Yep.
but it also saved my ass.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that.
You know, it's a thing. There are subgroups within recovery who are super skeptical about medication, and I think it's very dangerous.
I agree.
Completely disagree with them. I understand where they're coming from. I certainly know that each person has their own relationship to that stuff, and some of them have to have that kind of heart of a line about it. But when I spoke at NAMI's convention in New Orleans 5 or 6 years ago, this wonderful doctor who whose name I can't think of at the moment, who works with them a lot, who is a psychiatrist in Massachusetts. He said, listen, the other thing that's going on now is an opioid epidemic and a benzo epidemic.
Yep.
And the science says that it's almost impossible, clinically extremely unlikely, you're going to get off those drugs without some medical assistance, without some medication help. And I was like, well, there you go.
Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
because the trick about you don't want to hold up these standards that no one can live up to.
Exactly. Exactly. Were you, obviously you were in Pete Berg's Painkillers and so good.
I loved being a part of that for that just
I
that
was
reason.
gonna say, exactly. So I know how important it was to Pete to make that movie, and I'm wondering like if you all felt that way, that you all felt like you were doing something really important.
I mean, it's certainly something that I'd been watching.
Yeah.
There was a script that I was writing that I still hope to revisit someday, where just the research about it into the meth and opioid epidemic
Yep.
and the body count throughout the Midwest and the South. And, it's the
Mhm.
numbers. And again, I felt like stigma really played in there. People would be
Yep.
like, oh, these addicts. And sometimes when I would post stuff about mental health help or sobriety or getting help if you're addicted, would get met with this bizarre thing on kind of social media on the internet where they're like, they're weak. It's a weakness. And, anybody who spent any time around this, no, it's not
Exactly.
at all. It's very hereditary. First of all, you don't know what other trauma, other conditions, other ways habitually
Exactly.
it's been passed down to you. And even if it was a weakness, that's even sick. That you think that if someone has a weakness, first of all, you're judging, you're basically saying they have a weakness that they shouldn't have, which to me is you're just passing down some messed up quasi-patriarchal generational shame onto someone else that's just going to make them sicker. What if everyone wants to be happy? Um,
Yeah.
I can really get going. Anyways,
I think, I mean, everything you said is, you know, it's so, I'm so grateful that you're able to share this part of yourself. I think there's a big difference between privacy and secrecy. And I think that there's been a lot of secrecy for people in early, for people years and years ago that were in recovery because it wasn't understood and they were still looking at them in a certain way, like you were saying. And it's, as you said, the numbers and the numbers are piling up. The numbers are not numbers. They're people just like me and you. And that to me, we have to do something different. We have to start telling our stories, and we can still have a great amount of privacy. But there are certain aspects of it that I think someone can look at you and go, oh, he has anxiety and he's doing X, Y, and Z, and I can too. Or that idea of maybe they're not doing 22 episodes, but they're running and gunning and moving and moving and moving and working and workaholism and all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden they have a pause, not because maybe they're going on vacation, but maybe they broke their leg and they're sports and they're athlete and now they can't play. And that all of a sudden, what that's like in taking that, moving, and now not being able to do it, and what happens, and all those sensations and emotions that come up in our body. And now, later in our recovery, I know for me, I didn't even look at my trauma till I had 10 years sober, because I didn't even know what those feelings were. I was completely putting all my energy into work and helping others in a way that I never looked at myself. And it wasn't until I started really recognizing that inner feeling, like you were talking about anxiety, like this anxiety as this creature. And I started looking at the same thing and personifying mine. Trixie was my addiction, and there were other things as well. And what were these quote unquote creatures inside?
Yes, I think it's one of the things there's so much interesting stuff happening right now, but it's one of the things that I find most interesting, because for me, it wasn't that I was anxious about something happening. I was obviously, as I said, I was on vacations. So certainly
Right.
there were some issues going on, stuff I was sitting on, but my body would get attacked.
Yeah.
It was very physical. And then it became mental. And
Mhm.
I think the stuff that happened for me, just who I am as a creature, it would start physically, but it was always indicative of some other stuff going on. And I was like, I don't have trauma. What trauma?
Mhm.
People use that term too much. That's bullshit.
Exactly.
Well, your body is saying differently. So
Yes.
you can argue with your body, but how's that working?
How's that working out
One
for
of my
you?
mentors, yeah, one of my mentors in recovery is like, his favorite thing is just, well, how's that going?
Yeah.
And it really cuts through it all. So I'm certainly, what I find encouraging, and it's sad in a way, is I've watched so many people, including my wonderful 22-year-old daughter, really struggle with issues during COVID and
Yeah.
having their senior year taken away, basically, and not
Yes.
getting to leave home in a normal way, and the things that come up around it. And and there was an amazing, the New York Times podcast, The Daily, did an amazing piece about this, because on the one hand, I can certainly hear at different dinner parties, parents going, we never had this anxiety, and we never had OCD, and we never had all this stuff. And you're like, oh, bro, maybe you did. And also, and the thing that The Daily said that was really interesting was they interviewed a pediatrician, career
Mhm.
pediatrician, and she said her practice during COVID had gone to 65% mental health stuff.
Exactly.
And I think it's the same thing. These kids aren't choosing this, and she was trying to have to figure out how to help them. And what the upside of this was is that these kids were going through something really sophisticated way earlier. I mean, I certainly noticed when my daughter was in fourth or fifth grade, some of the girls started to like have their period
Mhm.
much earlier. And they
Mhm.
talked about this, that things are shifting, and
Exactly.
that these kids are going through stuff in a way they're so much more savvy about what they need and what's going on with them. They've gone
Yep.
through something that we didn't at their age.
Well, we didn't have access to information.
Yeah.
If we had to
Both positive and negative.
exactly, if we had to look something up, we had to go to what? The encyclopedia. Like people
Mhm.
don't even know what that is. Like, get a book in alphabetical order, look it up in the encyclopedia. And today they have amazing access. And with that, they also have enormous environmental and social trauma that they're seeing all over the world. And it's exhausting and it's so hard. And that feeling of like, oh my God, you don't even realize what kind of information you're taking in and the complexity of the trauma that we're even seeing that's not even our own, but we're feeling it and really taking it on.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I were talking earlier. I had a rough go when early in COVID, my my younger brother, a couple of years younger than me, who was struggling for a while with some of his own demons and own mental health stuff,
Mm.
passed away very suddenly. And, one of the factors was his struggle with alcoholism and the beating it took on his body.
Mhm.
And what a wonderful, loving, smart guy,
Mhm.
fought so hard. And I, in the bubble of early days of COVID, recently out of a marriage, very amicably separating from my ex and now my possibly best friend, Jennifer Gray.
I love
Um,
that. I love
I
that.
was, I was, um, I was in terrible shape.
Yeah.
You think you're prepared for grief. You think you're prepared for losing a sibling. I was not.
No
I
one
was not.
knew.
And I'd been worried and I'd been trying to help him and work out issues we had. And I was really floored in a way that it's just, it, I thought it was going to take me out. I couldn't manage the feelings. And I was terrified of the feelings. It's an ongoing battle that I think is intrinsic with mental health stuff, is being willing to tolerate difficult feelings, because again, you have some other creature in there, some other voice saying, this is too much, we're going to die.
Yeah.
And so you end up in this kind of back and forth about that. So grief has been a big part of what I've been trying to figure out. And you mentioned, the exercise part. I, the things that the therapy I got, the medication help I got was mostly good, sometimes really not helpful. And
Mhm.
but I just dragged myself to the ocean.
Yeah.
I was a very bad early surfer. I'm not a lot better now. And but I knew if I could get in the ocean, I could get through the rest of that day probably.
Yeah. There's something about the ocean and the enormity of it and the lack of control, especially with surfing. And I found this when I started surfing early on in my recovery because I just was called to the water. I think so many people are just called to the water,
It's a
and
gigantic metaphor.
it's a
It's
gigantic
bigger
metaphor.
than you. It's calm, and then all of a sudden it's really not.
Not
And if you're not careful, it will kill you. And if you fight it, it's not going to go well. And if you
exactly.
learn how to roll with it a little bit, you feel part of something bigger.
Exactly. And I always would describe that moment if you were lucky enough, and I'm not a good surfer at all. But if you're lucky enough to have that moment where you're paddling, you're paddling, you're paddling, and then you catch the wave, and there's that moment of you were in total control, or so you thought, when you're really not. And then all of a sudden it's taking you. And to me, that was how I started to find this aspect of me, like my soul, of what I refer to and what I call soul. And I started really recognizing this other place inside of me where it was okay to feel total powerlessness and it didn't have to feel scary. Because I think that's the thing about the dark and the darkness that we experience is it feels so scary. It feels like we're just going to continue down into this abyss, never be able to get out, and be living with all of these incredibly painful feelings.
Mhm.
So I love the metaphor of the ocean. I love anyone that I'm like, oh, you're afraid? Oh, you feel powerless? Oh, you feel this? You feel that? Get in the water. Just get in the water with my friend Pelly and let him take you out and go see what happens.
Yeah. And when people, friends of mine know, like, wait, you didn't do this for years. You lived here. You never. And I was like, I know. I went on vacation in Long Island and I took a surf lesson. But it's funny, you find people, and I guess this continues the metaphor,
Yeah.
people carry a lot of baggage, fear about the ocean.
Yep.
What about all the sharks? Isn't it freezing cold? And I was like, yes, I hate cold water. The
Yeah,
wetsuits
same.
are incredibly effective. But a lot of people, because it's this unknown.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, I don't know if you ever did, but if you ever go scuba diving, which I was terrified to
Mm.
do, and just for all of those reasons, and ended up on a press junket for dodgeball in Australia. And they sent Vince to do a 4-day thing like on some island. And so we went scuba diving. And so I got the like movie star crash course on this is how you scuba dive. And so we went down. My life changed. My life changed down there. I could not believe, and that, right, is the metaphor for the unconscious of this entire world beneath the surface that we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
It is so quiet, you can't believe it. So gorgeous and peaceful. And I think that really also shifted my perspective on not just the water, but soul and the unconscious and all of these things that you hear described, but you can't quite put into words. And that's why we use metaphor. That's why we tell stories of mythology and so on. And that was such a pivotal point. And from then on, I haven't been as afraid to go surfing.
Yeah. I still get scared sometimes.
Yeah, me
Like
too.
just make them
Me too.
scared.
Yeah, no, of course. I could see like a bunch of just nothing and it's instantly a shark. But we can do hard things. So
That should be a podcast.
we can do hard things. I think she already coined it.
Yes.
Um, okay, so before we leave, what was the greatest piece of advice that you were ever given?
In anything?
Exactly, anything at all.
I was lucky enough to stumble into a class as a very confused 20-year-old at NYU with being taught by David Mamet, the writer, director, filmmaker.
Mhm.
And he said a thing that's really changed things for me. He said, write the kind of play you would like to see, be the kind of actor you would like to work with. Kind of a adjunct golden ruleism, like be the kind of husband you would want to have, be the kind of friend you'd want to have.
I love
And
that.
like you can't, to a certain extent, it's funny, my dad, who I lost a year ago, was a minister and a theologian, and he did a sermon that was fascinating, which kind of goes against this, which was like, okay, but don't presume that everyone wants what you want.
Right.
You have to think about what the golden rule has a thing of like, maybe they don't want what you would want, which was an interesting way to think about the other. But I do think that there's a way, like, you can't really ever know what anybody else really wants, especially if you're trying to create something. All you can really do, and I've heard this funny a lot lately from, I think, Denis Villeneuve, who just made that amazing, these two Dune movies. He said, I'm really working for an audience of one. And it's what Tarantino has said as well. And I think it also carries over into life. You can really get lost trying to please other people,
Mm-hmm.
people please. And doesn't mean you're not going to be kind or considerate or be aware of what other people might need. But your best bet is to try to kind of follow that thing of here's who I want to be.
I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's creativity at its essence, right? That's where we get it from, that intuition, that place. And for speaking of
Well,
some,
so much falls away. I can't remember. I was thinking about what you said, which is if you just do that, that's plenty. You can't do 20 things at once. If you're
Mhm.
just going, what's the kind of thing I would want to see?
Exactly.
The rest will take care of itself.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that advice. Thank you again so much for your
Thank you.
vulnerability, your honesty, and hopefully this will help anyone who's listening. And give them some, relief that they're not by themselves.
They are not by themselves. I just gotta tell you, since I've been more public about these things in myself,
Mhm.
man, a lot of people in my life go, you too?
Yep.
I really felt like I was much more of an outlier, lunatic, broken person. And we're all a little lunatic. We're all a little broken. Can you stick up your hands, please? Man, that's a good nail color.
Thanks.
What name it? What's the name of it? I love nail color names.
I don't know.
Oh,
I mean, maybe Max,
Max.
MACKS.
Usually they're like, Scarlet Begonia or
Yeah, like,
Passionate Boyfriend or something.
yeah, these are like every other, I don't know.
Red.
I
They're
think they're,
red.
yeah, exactly. Um,
Okay.
I don't know. On that note,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thanks for
And
letting me be of service.
thank you. And we will talk very soon.
Absolutely. I'll be back next week. We'll do it again.
Maybe we'll go in the water together.
Please. Please.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. Talk to you
Talk to you
later.
soon. Bye.